As we all know that developers want instant access to databases, but platform teams, they need control, security, and governance. Klutch is an open source Kubernetes control plane that gives developers the very needed self-service data access while keeping provisioning centralized. And today we have with us once again Julian Fischer, founder and CEO of anynines, to talk just about that. Julian, first of all, it's great to have you back on the show at KubeCon again.
Well, great to be here again.
So first of all, as I always ask you, talk about the event, the audience, and your presence at the show.
Well, every KubeCon is different. We've been at those events for a couple of years, and you can see that the topics shift and the interest for tools like Klutch increases. So we can see that is, the most interesting part, at least for us, is like how do people respond to our product. Overall, it's another great conference, meeting good friends over and over again, makes those events like a big birthday party where you run into friends like repeatedly.
Yeah, that's true. And everybody's growing, projects are also graduating now. Let's talk about anynines and Klutch. What's going on with anynines and where is Klutch heading?
Well, interesting question. Klutch is maturing. A lot has been happening behind the scenes. We've been building Klutch to maturity. We've been adding more integrations. So we are about to, take Klutch and add what is necessary to become enterprise grade, which means building anynines Hub in the two major use cases, which is anynines Hub for AWS and anynines Hub for on-premises. That's basically the idea. If you run a lot of Kubernetes clusters, let's say on AWS, and you're an EKS user using the well-architected framework, how do you enable your users to get on-demand self-service while providing that central governance using Klutch as a central control plane for orchestration and governance? So if you do that, then you will see that the well-architected framework uses a particular layout and how AWS accounts are set out. For example, you have per tenant, your own EKS account, and your own account for services. So you have two accounts per tenant, and you have potentially many tenants. When an EKS application cluster is provisioned and the Klutch client is installed, it should be able to provision data services in the corresponding account that corresponds to the tenant. So those are features we've been adding behind the scenes, making Klutch applicable to large-scale use cases of the well-architected framework.
Excellent, thank you. Now, if for those who may not be familiar, and since we are at KubeCon, the audience is, of course, platform engineers, SREs, and of course, everybody's talking about AI these days. What specific problem does Klutch solve for platform team managing data services at a scale?
So in general, like everybody's using Kubernetes. And the bigger the organization gets, the more Kubernetes clusters they are likely to have. Now, if you provision a lot of Kubernetes clusters and you're trying to serve, hundreds or even thousands of application developers, running databases inside of Kubernetes clusters usually an anti-pattern. You don't want to put the burden of running data services and their automation. You don't want to put that responsibility on the shoulder of application developers. So when you're building in-house developer platforms, you need to separate database operations from application development. And that is basically where Klutch comes into the game, because we allow to have a central control plane where you manage all the integrations of all the data service automation that your company wants to use and expose to application developers. And all the application developers have to do is install a lightweight extension to the application cluster, and they get that local self-service. Declaring a database, there you go, from within your Kubernetes cluster. And this intent is then replicated towards the control plane and reconciled with the actual automation backend. So, for example, you can, with anynines Hub on AWS as an example, declare an RDS database, and it will be created for you. And it appears as if the database was local in your application cluster, but because that's where you control the database. That's where you declare it, that's where you attach applications to it, and it's delegated to the control plane and delegated to the AWS API eventually. So the application developer doesn't see that it's remote, while the platform team has the central overview. So they will be asking, okay, who uses RDS databases? Well, if your RDS usage is scattered across many AWS accounts, you have a topology in your AWS, you can use AWS billing in order to find out. But if you also integrate services that you've created on your own, or enterprise databases or other database vendors, then things get messy. And this is where Klutch shines, because it provides you that, overview. And you can do that on AWS. Later you will do that on other platforms too. And you can also do that on premises. It becomes this orchestration and governance entity that's been missing for years.
Excellent, thank you. And Klutch is open source. Talk about anynines Hub, the commercial which is using Klutch as foundation.
So Klutch itself solves the problem I just explained. It provides a central control plane. It gives you a set of abstractions like a service instance, service bindings, backup and restore, and allows you to create your own integrations. But you have to deploy it on your own. You have to secure it on your own, which is not trivial, especially in enterprise cases. There's a difference between how you deploy open source Klutch and how you deploy anynines Hub. Although anynines Hub internally obviously leverages open source Klutch as well. So there's no two versions of Klutch. There's just add-ons to Klutch that extend the functionality. For example, those integrations. So building integrations for Klutch is a big thing. So that's something we are addressing on the roadmap later on, which is making the development of Klutch integrations easy. Right now, there's a set of commercial integrations for the anynines data services, obviously, because that's for on-premises. You don't have RDS, so you need to have something that does on-demand provisioning for you. So either your operators of choice or well-proven virtual machine-based automation. And for use cases like Amazon, you want to integrate the Amazon services. So that has to be done by somebody. And that's basically the commercial part of it. But the orchestration and the framework, that's Klutch, and it's open source, and it remains to do so.
When we look at, of course, anynines, you are managing data services across Kubernetes, of course, Cloud Foundry, you mentioned AWS. How does Klutch provides that unified abstraction layer? So for teams, that's abstracted.
So the abstractions in Klutch themselves, like a service instance, service binding, service plans, originate from the Open Service Broker API, from the Cloud Foundry ecosystem. These abstractions have proven to be valuable. However, the Open Service Broker API was a bit strict about how they should look like. This is something we relaxed in Klutch. So a service instance is basically a CRD, and you can determine the structure of the CRD as you wish. As long as it's called a service instance, it allows you some sort of abstraction among different services, while it allows you also to be very custom about each service. In other words, if you have anynines Postgres versus RDS Postgres, they are more or less the same, and the abstractions will look more or less the same. But if you take a service instance to the edge with highly custom configuration of a service instance, these specs will differ, and that's okay. So we bring well-proven abstractions to the table. There is a change ongoing in Klutch where we also introduce a new entity called tenants. Because if you're building platforms, you want to have a tenant. Earlier I said you have per tenant, for example, 2 AWS accounts, a service account, and an EKS account. That is basically a tenant. And you want to tell your platform declaratively, that's a tenant. So we are going to introduce a tenant abstraction in Klutch. And on anynines Hub, there will be then implementations on what does it mean to declare a tenant. It could be something like a user pool in AWS Cognito, or it could be, along with that, also creating those AWS accounts. It's always a question how big your organization is and how your provisioning strategy of Kubernetes and EKS looks like, because that varies depending on the organization size.
And since you mentioned tenants, I want to talk about multi-tenancy and governance as well, because the fact is that developers, they want self-service, but without breaking all the compliance there. So can you talk about multi-tenants and governance as well?
Well, what a tenant is to be defined by the particular way how you use your infrastructure in the first place and how you deploy Kubernetes and how you use Kubernetes. So we have seen scenarios where there are 5 Kubernetes clusters for hundreds of users and application developers. I wouldn't recommend that, but it's what some people do. And some organizations with their particular workloads can make sense of such a topology. For smaller organizations, what we see is that you have, let's say, a production AWS account where all the applications sit together, the application clusters, but they could be, for example, isolated in different VPCs. In some other clients, they are separated with networks, but not with VPCs. So that's what I mean, is you have to be flexible on the level of the anynines hub and Klutch framework to embed and be integrated in those different scenarios. And this is where there's just a lot of complexity that needs to be automated over time. So a tenant could mean different things in different platforms. But as a first approximation, in large enterprise clients, it usually means a set of AWS accounts, where it's also imaginable to make a different flavor of tenant, where a tenant is not an AWS account or a set of AWS accounts, but just a share on an EKS cluster. So that's what I'm saying is Klutch starts with giving you abstractions. And as we see now, is there will be more or less of a blueprint where you follow a designated path, defining what different types of tenants do you have, what are the services you want to integrate, here's a set of existing integrations, or here is a way on how you write your own. So it also becomes a reference model on how to approach this problem in a more generic manner. It's not only a solution, here it is, take it or leave it, but it's a framework that guides you through the design decisions you have to make. That's something that crystallizes right now as we see more of those different scenarios. It's, if you go to the website right now, that's not what you'll find in the documentation yet. But this is where I see it evolves to.
Right. And when you have conversations here, what kind of queries, what kind of concern, what kind of challenges when the topics that we covered about that you hear here, because that feedback is once again feeding back to the loop of what anynines should be working on.
Well, if you talk to people, at a booth, for example, you have this pyramid of roles that come by. You have the developers, most of the developers, they have seen a single Kubernetes cluster and spend most of their time sitting in front of a single Kubernetes cluster. Often they don't see the challenge that's behind Klutch because they are not platform engineers, they are application engineers. So for us, one of the mission is to tell them, look, you have a particular set of ideas on how things should be done. Sitting in front of one cluster, you're looking at a larger number of clusters, things change. So it's like an educational challenge. Platform engineers coming by, you can see that they now have recognized the problem. When we talked about a few years at these conferences, even platform engineers came by, they didn't see the problem. And that changed in the past 2 years. Now they see the problem, and now the urgency in the problem increases. So that's really interesting.
And since you mentioned, past versus now, you have been in Cloud Foundry world, for a long time. We have talked about this a lot in past, and I want to talk about it one more time, maybe last time. How are the Cloud Foundry users evolving and moving to Kubernetes? Because when I look at anynines, when I go to the website, all the anynines services, not the anynines service, but all the offerings that you have, they're more geared towards Kubernetes workloads. So talk about that evolution that you're seeing there and how anynines is best positioned to help those customers.
That's a good question. And I really have to sort my thoughts on this one because it's quite controversial what people do. Not controversial, but there's a clustering of what people do. Some people see that Cloud Foundry is in the demise and move away from it. They just lost their belief in that this is a technology that is sustainable. Well, and for some organization that makes sense because they can get away with not having Cloud Foundry. But if you're looking at organizations with a lot of application developers and they have 12-factor compliant apps and I've been saying that for years, Cloud Foundry to this day is a turnkey solution for building an application developer platform. You don't have the Klutch problem if you have a Cloud Foundry. You have a marketplace, you have the open service broker API, you have the anynines data services, you have a turnkey solution. We basically suck dry commercial Cloud Foundry environments, put it on anynines Cloud Foundry with anynines data services, and it runs and runs and runs. Uptime, great. There's no outage here and outage there because you have to maintain this and maintain that. You don't have to train each team on how to run Cloud Foundry. It's centrally provided and it works at scale. So if you take that operational efficiency and you calculate how much overhead you have per app, there's no better solution for running a large number of apps than Cloud Foundry to this day. I still believe this is going to change, but interestingly, it did not happen yet. So where I see, and then consequently, we have customers looking at this fact very clearly. Of course, there's uncertainty about what happens to the Cloud Foundry Foundation and the overall, maintenance of Cloud Foundry. But so far, we have good and strong companies behind it. I mean, Broadcom has doubled down on Cloud Foundry. SAP is still strong with Cloud Foundry, and other companies are joining the community. The events are growing again. So we basically see the Cloud Foundry stack as a stable alternative to Kubernetes, where 12-factor applications, a lot of them need to be operated with a high economy, a financial economy. Now, organizations, all of them have Kubernetes demand internally. And it's absolutely okay to look at application developers and tell them Kubernetes is the way to go. It is possible, but it's not cheaper. It's not more efficient. It leaves organizations with more unsolved problems than Cloud Foundry does, but it provides more flexibility and adaptability. So it's a trade-off. If you ask me about the market, well, obviously Kubernetes is the bigger, more dynamic, more appealing market to produce products today. So that's also crystal clear.
Oh, that's true. Is it possible for you to also touch on CF appstage as well, and how does it fit into the platform engineering,
Absolutely. I mean, in the Cloud Foundry ecosystem, you either come from a commercial Cloud Foundry distribution, which usually has some sort of UI to manage your applications, and you'd be surprised how many enterprise customers still use a UI to fiddle around with their applications, although the CLI or the API would be the preferred choice. Well, it is a demand. So we had Stratus UI as an open source project, but it didn't age well. There's less maintenance going on there, and the technical debt accumulating in that project led to a point where developing more features, new features, and keeping the systems secure is not economically maintainable and sustainable anymore. So we decided to build a replacement that is entirely based on Backstage, which is the way to go in 2025 and 2026 on building UIs. So CF Appstage is a Stratus UI replacement. It's built on the Cloud Foundry API version 3. It's blazingly fast, easy to use. And the team we've built building CF Appstage is going to continue to build a similar UI framework for platform engineers as well as application developers for Klutch as well. So Backstage is basically the new front end for anynines platform, Cloud Foundry and anynines data services, but also for anynines hub with Klutch and all the integrations we got there.
Julian, once again, thank you so much for talking about anynines, anynines hub, Klutch, Cloud Foundry, and whole evolution to Kubernetes. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to the next session. Thank you.
And thank you for having me and my strong opinions every time. Being open to those strong opinions is, a great gift of yours.